smoke and ash. It's how this story begins and how it ends. June 21st, 1582. Kyoto is still asleep under a cool pre-dawn fog, but at the very heart of the capital, in the Honnō-ji temple, all hell has broken loose. The wooden walls, which for centuries absorbed the scent of incense and the whisper of prayers, now crackle and groan, consumed by greedy red flame. The air is thick, acrid, smelling of burning pine, superheated metal, and spilled blood. In this chaos, surrounded by a handful of loyal bodyguards, stands the man who yesterday believed he was master of Japan, Oda Nobunaga. His name, which struck terror in daimyo from the eastern seas to the western mountains, is now drowning in the clash of swords and the victory cries of enemies storming the temple grounds. But the most terrifying sound is not the battle. It is a single name, passed from lip to lip like poison. Akechi. It is Lord Akechi's troops. Here, the greatest paradox of Japanese history is born. The man who crushed the mighty Takeda and Asakura clans, who burned defiant monasteries to the ground, the man nicknamed the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven for his cruelty and blasphemy, was trapped. And the trap was set not by one of his many sworn enemies, but by his most trusted, most intelligent, seemingly most loyal general, Akechi Mitsuhide. The great unifier, one step away from total control of the country, was betrayed not by an enemy coalition, but by a single knife in the back. And as the flames devour his temporary residence, a single, silent, but deafening question hangs in the air, echoing through the centuries. Why? How could this genius of control, who built his empire on ruthless calculation, make such a fatal error and fall victim to the man closest to him? To understand this, we must go back to the very beginning, to the world that spawned this demon. To understand a monster, you must first see the swamp that spawned him. Mid-16th century Japan, the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states, was just such a place. It was not a single nation, but a boiling cauldron of hundreds of clans, led by daimyo, feudal lords whose ambitions knew no bounds. Imagine a giant chessboard stretching from the snowy mountains of Hokkaido to the tropical islands of Ryukyu, where every piece moves by its own rules, and the main goal isn't checkmate, but simply surviving another day. The authority of the emperor, a direct descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu, was pure fiction. His court in Kyoto was a guardian of ancient traditions, but had not a single soldier to back its edicts. The shogun of the Ashikaga clan, the military ruler who was supposed to govern, was a pathetic puppet, whose authority didn't extend beyond the capital's city walls. This was a time when the path to advancement was paved in blood. The principle of Gekokujo, the low overthrowing the high, became the rule, not the exception. A talented samurai could become a general, and a cunning general could become ruler of a province if he had the courage and ruthlessness to stab his master in the back. Loyalty was a luxury few could afford. Alliances made at dawn were broken by dusk. In this world of constant war, where honor was just a beautiful word to hide betrayal, and a man's life was worth less than his sword, Oda Nobunaga was destined to appear. He was not a product of this system. He was its sentence. He absorbed its poison, its cynicism, and its cruelty, only to one day use them as a weapon for its total and final destruction. Oda Nobunaga was not born at the top of this predatory world. His clan, based in Owari province, was far from the most powerful. It was a land of warriors and merchants, sandwiched between two giants. To the east, the Imagawa clan, rulers of Suruga and Totomi provinces, who possessed a huge army and claims on all of central Japan. To the west, the Saito clan of Mino province, treacherous and cunning, known as the Vipers. Nobunaga's father, Oda Nobunaga, was a man of his time, a brave and capable warlord nicknamed the Tiger of Owari. He spent his life desperately navigating between these two millstones, making temporary alliances, fighting exhausting border wars, trying to consolidate and expand his domain. Nobunaga grew up watching this endless struggle. He saw how his father, despite all his talents, could never break out of this vicious cycle and create a truly stable state. He inherited not an empire, but a knot of unresolved problems, shaky authority, a province not fully conquered, where even his own relatives and vassals plotted conspiracies, and two mortal enemies at his very borders. This inheritance was both his curse and his greatest gift. It stripped him of illusions. He understood from a young age that his father's methods of honor, local victories, and temporary alliances led to a dead end. To escape the cage his clan was in, he couldn't just play by the rules. He had to shatter the board itself. This idea, born in the shadow of his father's battles, would become the foundation of his entire future strategy, transforming him from the heir of a minor daimyo into the architect of a new Japan. While other young heirs studied calligraphy and military strategy from ancient Chinese texts, young Oda Nobunaga was doing things that horrified his tutors and vassals. He wore loud, provocative clothing, half male, half female, with a tiger skin belt holding a gourd flask. He ignored complex rituals and court etiquette, could show up at his father's funeral and hurl a handful of incense at the funeral tablet, instead of performing the proper rites. He spent his time not with high-ranking samurai, but with commoners, foot soldiers, ashigaru, merchants, even vagrants, eating, drinking, and joining in their crude amusements. For this behavior, he earned his famous nickname, Owari no Outsuk, the Big Fool of Owari. For conservative samurai society, his behavior wasn't just eccentric. It was scandalous, shameful, proof of a complete lack of dignity and sense. But his father's old vassals, shaking their heads and whispering of the Oda clan's coming decline, were making a fatal mistake. They saw only the mask, a deliberate performance. Behind the fool persona hid the cold, sharp mind of an analyst. By mixing with commoners, he wasn't just amusing himself, he was gathering intelligence. He was learning what his future subjects lived by, what worried them, how they fought, what they feared. He saw them not as despicable rabble, but as a valuable resource, the future soldiers of his new army. By ignoring etiquette, he was testing people, identifying those capable of thinking outside the box, who valued results over form. This persona of the fool became his first and most effective weapon. While everyone underestimated him, seeing him as a harmless eccentric, he studied their weaknesses, built his strength, and waited for the moment to strike, a blow that would make all of Japan tremble. The atmosphere Nobunaga grew up in was soaked not just in gunpowder, but in the poison of betrayal. The world of Sengoku knew no sentiment, and family was not a fortress, but a viper's nest, where brother plotted against brother and uncle prepared poison for his nephew. Nobunaga learned these lessons through bitter experience. Even while his father was alive, he saw the most trusted vassals defect to the enemy. After Nobuhide's death, the power struggle within the Oda clan itself erupted with new force. His own uncle, Oda Nobutomo, seized a key castle and conspired with his enemies. His younger brother, Nobuyuki, his mother's favorite, and the choice of many old vassals who considered him a more worthy heir than the eccentric fool, openly led a plot to kill Nobunaga and take his place. Nobunaga acted with the icy cruelty that would become his signature. First, he defeated his uncle and forced him to commit seppuku. Then, facing his brother's treason, he, at his mother's urging, forgave him. But when Nobuyuki began plotting a second time, there was no pardon. Nobunaga faked an illness, lured his brother to his quarters, and had him coldly executed. These events forged his character. He learned once and for all that blood ties were meaningless and trust was a fatal weakness. Power rested not on love or respect, but on strength and fear. Anyone who stood in the way of his goal, be it enemy, ally, or family member, must be eliminated. This ruthless pragmatism, forged in the fire of family conflict, separated him from other daimyo of his era. They sought glory and expansion. Nobunaga sought absolute control, a complete remaking of the world, and he was willing to pay any price, even if that price was the blood of his own family. In 1560, the fool mask was torn off forever, and Japan saw Oda Nobunaga's true face, that of a brilliant and reckless predator. Imagawa Yoshimoto, one of the most powerful daimyo of the time, known as the first archer of the Tokaido, gathered a massive army, estimated at 25 to 40,000 men, and marched on Kyoto to declare himself shogun. His path lay through Owari province, Nobunaga's domain. Crushing the Oda clan seemed like a minor prelude to his triumph. Nobunaga had 10 times fewer men, about 2, maybe 3,000 warriors. His counselors begged him to barricade himself in his castle, Kiyosu, and prepare for a long but hopeless siege. It was logical, rational, and utterly suicidal. Nobunaga did the one thing no one expected. Leaving only a small garrison in the castle with numerous banners to mislead the enemy, he marched out with the bulk of his forces to meet the giant Imagawa army. Yoshimoto himself, drunk on his first easy victories and his overwhelming power, had camped to rest in a narrow gorge called Okehazama. Then, the heavens handed Nobunaga a chance. A violent summer thunderstorm erupted, under the cover of a wall of rain and hurricane-force winds, which concealed his movements and muffled the noise. Nobunaga led his detachment in a desperate, lightning assault straight into Imagawa's command post. Caught completely by surprise, Imagawa's warriors failed to organize a defense. In minutes, it was over. Imagawa Yoshimoto himself was killed, and his severed head, mounted on a spear, became the symbol of an impossible victory. The Battle of Okehazama was not just a military triumph, it was an earthquake that shook Japan's entire political structure. The insignificant fool of Owari, overnight, became a figure of national importance, and his name became synonymous with audacity, genius, and almost supernatural luck. The legend had begun its bloody march. After the brilliant victory at Okehazama and the subsequent conquest of the neighboring Mino province by defeating the Saito clan, Nobunaga moved his capital to Gifu Castle. It was here that he revealed his true, all-consuming ambition, cast in 4 characters that he ordered engraved on his personal seal: Tenka Fubu. The literal translation is the realm under military power, or spread military rule under the heavens. But its true meaning was far deeper and more terrifying. This was not just a declaration of intent, like other daimyo made. It was a manifesto, declaring war on the entire existing world order. Tenka, the realm, or all under heaven, meant not just his province or neighboring lands, but all of Japan, united under a single ruler. Fubu, military force, meant that this unification would be achieved not through negotiation, dynastic marriages, or recognizing the authority of the shogun and emperor. It would be achieved exclusively by force of arms, by fire and sword, by crushing anyone who dared stand in the way. This philosophy was a direct slap in the face to the entire samurai culture, which was based on complex rituals, notions of honor, vassal loyalty, and respect for ancient bloodlines. Nobunaga was, in essence, saying, "Your traditions, your honor, your gods, none of it matters. Only absolute power matters, and I will take it by force." This seal became the symbol of his rule. Every document that left his headquarters bore this imprint, this promise, and this threat. Tenkafubu was a program, an ideology, and a prophecy all at once. It was the goal for which he was willing to burn temples, exterminate clans, and even sacrifice his own generals. And it was this unbending, ruthless motto that began to turn him, in the eyes of many, from a hero liberator into a demon destroyer. The next logical step on the path to realizing Tenkafubu was the capture of Japan's political and cultural heart, the capital, Kyoto. But Nobunaga was not just a reckless warlord. He was a sharp and cynical politician. He understood that simply seizing the capital would make him a usurper in the eyes of other daimyo and provoke universal resistance. He needed a legitimate pretext, a screen to hide his true intentions. And fate gave him that chance in the person of Ashikaga Yoshiaki, the younger brother of the murdered shogun, who was wandering the country looking for a powerful patron to help him reclaim his rightful title. In 1568, Nobunaga formed an alliance with him. Assembling a powerful army, he made a swift march on Kyoto, meeting almost no resistance. He entered the capital not as a conqueror, but as a defender of justice, restoring the rightful authority. He placed Yoshiaki on the shogun's throne, receiving his gratitude and official recognition. But the masks came off very quickly. Nobunaga forced Yoshiaki to sign an edict stating that the shogun could make no decisions without his patron's approval. In effect, he turned the head of Japan's military government into his pocket puppet. He used the shogun's authority to send orders to other daimyo, demanding their submission and declaring them enemies of the throne if they refused. It was a brilliant move. Formally, he remained just one of many provincial rulers, but in fact, he already held the levers of power for all of central Japan. However, this success also created a new, even more formidable threat. Other powerful clans and religious institutions, seeing how fast the upstart from Owari was growing, realized he would not stop until he had subjugated everyone. Thus, the first great coalition against Nobunaga began to form, and he would soon show them that his methods of warfare had nothing in common with the noble rules of war. Nobunaga's enemies were numerous and powerful. The Asakura and Azai clans, his former allies, united against him, along with influential Buddhist sects that had their own armies of warrior monks, Sohei, and controlled vast, tax-exempt lands. One of the most implacable foes was the monastery complex of Enryaku-ji on the sacred Mount Hiei, towering over Kyoto. This monastery, founded over 700 years earlier, was not just a religious center, but a true state within a state, with thousands of warriors who frequently meddled in politics and terrorized the capital itself. When the monks of Mount Hiei openly supported Nobunaga's enemies, giving sanctuary to the Asakura and Azai armies, his patience snapped. In 1571, he gave an order that sent a shockwave through all of Japan and forever cemented his reputation as a demon. His 30,000-strong army surrounded Mount Hiei in a tight ring. He did not negotiate or challenge the monks to honorable combat. He ordered his soldiers to advance up the slopes and kill everyone they met, sparing neither warriors, nor old monks, nor the women and children seeking refuge within the temple walls. And then he ordered the entire gigantic complex to be set ablaze. 3,000 buildings, temples, pagodas, libraries holding priceless treasures of culture and religion were reduced to ash. The fire on Mount Hiei was not just an act of war, It was an act of symbolic terror. Nobunaga had demonstratively shown the entire country that for him, nothing was sacred. Anyone who challenged him, be it a daimyo, a shogun, or even the gods themselves, would be destroyed without the slightest hesitation. After this event, he became known as the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven, the title of a Buddhist demon who revels in destruction. And Nobunaga proudly accepted the nickname. If the burning of Mount Hiei demonstrated Nobunaga's demonic cruelty, the Battle of Nagashino in 1575 revealed his cold, revolutionary genius. His main adversary at that time was the Takeda clan, led by Takeda Katsuyori, son of the legendary Takeda Shingen. The Takeda army was famed for its cavalry, considered the most powerful and invincible force in Japan. These elite, armored samurai on horseback swept away any infantry in their path. When the 15,000-strong Takeda army besieged Nagashino Castle, which belonged to Nobunaga's ally, Tokugawa Ieyasu, their victory seemed inevitable. Nobunaga and Ieyasu brought a combined army of about 38,000 men. But instead of meeting the famous cavalry in an open field, Nobunaga employed a tactic that forever changed the face of Japanese warfare. He ordered his troops to position themselves behind a river on hilly terrain and to build a complex system of wooden palisades and barricades, leaving gaps for counterattacks. Behind these fortifications, he placed a detachment of 3,000 Ashigaru, armed with arquebuses, matchlock rifles introduced to Japan by the Portuguese. Nobunaga was one of the first daimyo to appreciate the potential of this new weapon. He didn't just arm soldiers with it. He developed a new tactic. He divided the gunmen into 3 ranks. While one rank fired, the other 2 reloaded. This allowed for a near-continuous, devastating volley of fire. When Takeda Katsuyori, confident in his invincible cavalry, repeatedly threw his best samurai into charges against the fortifications, they were met by storms of lead. The greatest cavalry in Japan was slaughtered, as if on a firing range. This wasn't just a victory, it was a massacre that marked the end of an entire era. Nobunaga had proven that the age of noble, individual samurai warriors was over. The era of mass, disciplined armies, where technology and tactics trumped valor and lineage, had begun. The path to unifying Japan was too long and arduous to walk alone, and even a titan like Oda Nobunaga needed loyal and talented assistance. 3 figures in his circle stood out, and history has bound their names together forever. The first was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a man of the lowest birth, a former sandal-bearer who, thanks to his sharp mind, incredible energy, and boundless loyalty, had a meteoric career and became one of Nobunaga's best generals. For his ungainly appearance and lively character, he earned the nickname Monkey. Hideyoshi was a genius of negotiation, logistics, and siege warfare. He knew how to handle people and often secured the bloodless surrender of fortresses where others saw only an assault. The second pillar was Tokugawa Ieyasu, the daimyo of Mikawa province, a faithful and reliable ally of Nobunaga on his eastern borders. Ieyasu was the complete opposite of Hideyoshi, reserved, calculating, and incredibly patient, for which he was nicknamed the Old Badger. He was a master of long-term strategy who knew how to bide his time, surviving any storm. His unbreakable alliance with Nobunaga secured the latter's rear, allowing him to focus on campaigns in the West. In this triumvirate, Nobunaga was the undisputed leader, the brain and the battering ram. He was the demon who was not afraid to make the most brutal decisions. Hideyoshi was his hands, carrying out the most complex tasks, and Ieyasu was his shield, guarding his back. Their alliance, based on a mix of fear, respect, and personal gain, was the force that moved history. But in the shadow of these giants was another, no less important figure, whose fate would prove fatal to their master. Among the rough and pragmatic warlords who formed the core of Nobunaga's army, Akechi Mitsuhide was the odd one out. He was neither a commoner upstart like Hideyoshi, nor a hereditary daimyo like Ieyasu. Mitsuhide belonged to a noble, though impoverished family, and was a man of high culture. He was a recognized master of the tea ceremony, a talented poet, a scholar of classical literature and court etiquette. In the cruel and ignorant world of Sengoku, he was the epitome of old aristocratic refinement. Nobunaga, who, despite his own contempt for tradition, valued talent in all its forms, quickly saw in Mitsuhide more than just a warrior. He saw a brilliant administrator, capable of governing conquered provinces, and a keen strategist, whose sharp mind could unravel the most complex political intrigles. Nobunaga entrusted Mitsuhide with the most critical tasks, making him one of his first generals to receive his own castle and vast domains. Their relationship was a complex symbiosis of opposites. The pragmatic and quick-tempered Nobunaga likely saw the cultured Mitsuhide as a bridge to connect his new, power-based rule with the old, aristocratic world of Kyoto. Mitsuhide, in turn, undoubtedly admired the genius and scale of his master, who was single-handedly changing the course of history. But in this admiration lay the seed of future conflict. Every one of Nobunaga's flashes of rage, every act of sacrilege and cruelty, every show of contempt for the very traditions Mitsuhide revered, was a painful sting for the poet general, a reminder that he was serving not just a great ruler, but a true demon, one who was destroying the very soul of Japan. At the height of his power, with most of central Japan already at his feet, Oda Nobunaga decided to create a material symbol of his authority, a monument that would eclipse everything built before it. This symbol was Azuchi Castle, erected on the shores of Lake Biwa. This was not just a military fortification, it was a declaration carved in stone and wood. The castle was built on a mountain and had 7 stories, which was unheard of. The outer walls were painted in different colors, white, red, blue, and the roof was covered with gold tiles. But the most astonishing part was inside. The central keep, the Tenshu, was designed as an earthly embodiment of Mount Sumeru, the center of the universe in Buddhist cosmology. The lower floors were painted with scenes from the lives of Confucius, Laozi, Buddha, and other sages, symbolizing all human knowledge. But the higher a visitor climbed, the closer they came to the divine. The very top, the 7th floor, was completely covered in gold, and, according to Jesuit missionaries who visited the castle, was so dazzling it seemed like an earthly paradise. And here, Nobunaga committed his most daring act of hubris. In Buddhist tradition, the peak of Mount Sumeru is the abode of deities. According to persistent rumors, Nobunaga ordered that at the very top, in this golden sanctuary, there be placed not an image of Buddha or any deity, but his own portrait, or perhaps left empty, implying that he himself was its master. Azuchi Castle became a challenge to the heavens. Nobunaga was no longer just unifying the country. He was trying on the role of a living god, creating a new world in his own image. This boundless pride awed some and horrified others, especially those who saw it as a terrible sacrilege that could not go unpunished. Nobunaga's contempt for tradition and his tendency toward shocking cruelty were evident not only in his military campaigns, but also in his personal actions, which left deep scars on the souls of his vassals. One of the most infamous episodes was a feast he held in 1574 to celebrate his victory over the Azai and Asakura clans. Azai Nagamasa was not just an enemy. He had once been Nobunaga's ally and the husband of his beloved sister, Oichi. Nobunaga took his betrayal as a deep personal offense. After both daimyo were defeated and committed seppuku, Nobunaga was not satisfied with their deaths. He ordered their heads to be brought to him. But instead of burying them with due honors, as samurai etiquette demanded, he did the unthinkable. He had artisans clean the skulls, coat them in gold lacquer, and turn them into cups for sake. At the New Year's feast, in the presence of all his generals, he passed these ghastly trophies around, forcing them to drink from the heads of their former enemies and allies. For Nobunaga, this was the ultimate symbol of triumph, a demonstration that his enemies would be finished not only physically, but symbolically, their honor trampled even after death. However, for many present, raised in the strict traditions of the samurai code, this act was not just cruel, but barbaric and sacrilegious. One can only imagine what Akechi Mitsuhide, a man of refined culture, felt, forced to participate in this monstrous ritual. Every sip of sake from a golden skull was, for him, likely a sip of poison, a reminder that his master had crossed the line separating a great warrior from a mad tyrant. These omens of the storm became more frequent, and cracks in the monolith of Nobunaga's power began to appear long before the fire at Honnō-ji. If the skull incident was a symbolic insult to all, the incident during the campaign against the Hatano clan in Tanba province became a deep personal tragedy for Akechi Mitsuhide, and perhaps the fatal act that broke his loyalty. Nobunaga entrusted Mitsuhide with the conquest of this province. After a long and bloody siege of Yakami Castle, Mitsuhide, seeking to avoid further losses, entered into negotiations with the head of the Hatano clan. He gave them his samurai word that if they surrendered, their lives would be spared. To prove his sincerity, according to one of the most common versions, he left his own mother in the castle as a hostage. Believing the word of honor of one of Oda's top generals, the Hatano clan surrendered. Mitsuhide triumphantly brought the captive lords to Nobunaga in Kyoto, and here, Nobunaga committed an act of monstrous treachery. Despising the promise made by his general, he ordered all who surrendered to be crucified and executed. This was a public humiliation for Mitsuhide, whose word was trampled by his own master. But the consequences were even more horrific. The enraged Hatano vassals remaining in the castle, in revenge for the betrayal, seized Mitsuhide's mother and brutally murdered her. It is impossible to overstate the depth of this blow. He lost more than his mother. He lost his face, his honor. In his eyes, the culprit for this tragedy and this shame was not the Hatano clan, but his own master, Oda Nobunaga, for whom a samurai's word and the life of his general's mother were just pawns in his great game. From that moment, the relationship between them likely changed forever. Outwardly, Mitsuhide remained as loyal and efficient as ever, but inside, a cold, hidden hatred had likely taken root. The humiliations Nobunaga subjected Mitsuhide to were not limited to political treachery. As his power grew, Nobunaga became increasingly arrogant, quick-tempered, and cruel toward his inner circle. And Akechi Mitsuhide, with his refinement and heightened sense of dignity, for some reason became his favorite target. The chronicles and later tales are full of stories illustrating this systematic psychological abuse. One of the most famous legends tells of a feast for Tokugawa Ieyasu, which Nobunaga had tasked Mitsuhide with organizing. When Nobunaga discovered that one of the fish served was not fresh, he flew into a rage. In front of all the guests and generals, he unleashed a torrent of insults on Mitsuhide, accusing him of incompetence. Another, even more humiliating story, often cited as a primary reason for the betrayal, claims that during one banquet, Nobunaga, in a foul mood, grabbed Mitsuhide by the head and repeatedly struck it against a carved pillar, mocking him like a boy. For a samurai, whose status and honor were more important than life itself, such public humiliation was tantamount to a slow execution. Each such incident stripped away another layer of Mitsuhide's loyalty and admiration, leaving only burning shame and a thirst for revenge. Nobunaga, the genius of strategy and crowd psychology, proved to be astonishingly blind to individual psychology. He saw Mitsuhide only as an effective tool, to be used and reprimanded at will. He failed to understand that this tool possessed its own will, pride, and most dangerously, a memory that meticulously recorded every insult, waiting for the hour to settle the account. Beyond the personal grievances that slowly but surely eroded Mitsuhide's loyalty, another, far more subtle and dangerous intrigue was brewing on Japan's political stage. As Nobunaga's power became absolute, he began to pose a threat not only to other daimyo, but also to the country's most ancient institutions, including the imperial court itself. The emperor, though stripped of real military power, remained a sacred figure, the source of all legitimacy. Nobunaga formally showed him respect, but his actions spoke otherwise. He demanded unheard-of concessions from the court, interfered in court affairs, and, according to some accounts, even hinted that the emperor should abdicate in his favor, or even declare him a living god. The conservative Kyoto aristocracy, which had guarded the chrysanthemum throne for centuries, could not tolerate this. There is a well-founded historical theory that the imperial court and allied noble families saw Nobunaga as a destructive tyrant and began secretly searching for a way to eliminate him. And the ideal figure for this role was none other than Akechi Mitsuhide. He was the only one of Nobunaga's top generals who had close ties to the court aristocracy, shared their cultural values, and understood their fears. It is entirely possible that a subtle conspiracy was woven behind Nobunaga's back. The aristocrats may have secretly met with Mitsuhide, playing on his wounded pride and sense of duty to tradition, convincing him that by killing Nobunaga, he would not be committing treason, but performing a sacred duty, saving the emperor and Japan from a demon. In this light, Mitsuhide's act ceases to be mere personal revenge and becomes a political assassination, a coup d'etat carried out in the name of preserving the 1,000-year-old order. By the early summer of 1582, the chess game to unify Japan was approaching its endgame. Nobunaga controlled the entire central part of the country. To the east, his loyal ally Tokugawa Ieyasu held the Hojo clan in check. To the north, the powerful Uesugi Kenshin had been defeated. Only a few major pockets of resistance remained. One of these was in the west, where the Mori clan, lords of the Chugoku region, continued their fierce resistance. Nobunaga had sent his most talented general, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, there, who was at that moment conducting an exhausting siege of Takamatsu Castle. To hasten the victory, Nobunaga decided to go to the front personally with reinforcements. At the end of May, he arrived in Kyoto and stayed at the Honnō-ji temple, planning to continue west in a few days. He had only a small personal guard with him, no more than 100 men. He felt completely secure in the heart of his domains. And here, at this very moment, he made his last and fatal mistake. He gave an order to Akechi Mitsuhide, whose domains were nearby, to assemble his army and also immediately march west to join Hideyoshi's forces. Nobunaga, the man who built his career on mistrust and foresight, who always calculated everything several moves ahead, showed astonishing carelessness. He placed a multi-thousand-strong army in the hands of a man he had systematically humiliated, and he positioned that army between himself and the front lines, while he remained virtually defenseless in the very center of the capital. He himself had handed a loaded gun to his future murderer. Fate had arranged all the pieces on the board for the final, decisive move. The night of June 20th to 21st, 1582. Akechi Mitsuhide's 13,000-strong army marches out of its Kameyama castle. The official objective, a march west to reinforce Hideyoshi. The soldiers and most of the officers do not doubt the order, but when the army reaches the Katsura River, where the road forks, one branch leading west to the front, the other straight to Kyoto, Mitsuhide orders a halt. He gathers his closest commanders. The moment of truth has arrived. In the ensuing silence, broken only by the chirping of cicadas and the splash of water, he speaks the phrase that will change Japanese history forever. The exact words are lost to time, but their essence, as passed down by chroniclers, was this: "Our enemy is not in Takamatsu. Our enemy is in Honnō-ji." For the officers, it was a shock, a bolt from the blue. To move against Oda Nobunaga, the most powerful man in the country, was sheer suicide. But Mitsuhide must have found the right words. He might have spoken of Nobunaga's tyranny, his blasphemies, a secret order from the emperor, the defense of tradition. Or perhaps he simply presented them with a fact, and the commander's authority, backed by the might of his army, left them no choice. In that moment, the Rubicon was crossed. Years of hidden resentment, humiliation, fear for his life, political intrigues, and perhaps a sincere belief in his own righteousness, all of it condensed into one simple, irreversible decision. Akechi Mitsuhide's army turns, and in complete silence, under cover of night, begins its march on the sleeping capital. Every step brings them closer to the temple, where the man who believed himself invincible sleeps, unaware. The pre-dawn hour at Honnō-ji was shattered, not by roosters, but by the battle cry of thousands of soldiers. Akechi Mitsuhide's army, like a phantom tide, flooded the temple grounds. Nobunaga's small guard was swept away in the first few minutes. Waking from the noise of battle, Nobunaga initially thought it was a simple brawl among his bodyguards. But when the first arrows pierced the paper shoji screens, and one of his pages, choking, screamed the traitor's name, Akechi, he understood everything. In that critical moment, he did not panic. The Demon King, faced with betrayal, showed why he was the greatest warrior of his time. According to legend, he calmly said, "It can't be helped." He grabbed his bow and began to personally shoot at the attackers. When the bowstring snapped, he took up a spear and threw himself into the thick of the fight, battling alongside his last loyal men, including his young attendant and weapons bearer, Mori Ranmaru. But the forces were too unequal, a few dozen warriors against 13,000. Soon, Nobunaga was wounded by an arrow in the shoulder. Realizing the end was near, he made his final decision. The greatest prize in any samurai battle was the enemy commander's head. Nobunaga was not going to give Mitsuhide that satisfaction. He retreated deep into the burning temple, which by then had become a giant funeral pyre. There, in the roaring flames, unseen by his enemies, the greatest conqueror of his era committed seppuku, ritual suicide, by cutting open his stomach. His faithful page, Mori Ranmaru, according to one version, set the room ablaze so his master's body would be consumed by the fire and not fall into the hands of the traitors. The paradox had reached its climax. The man who built his empire with fire and sword died in the fire, betrayed by his most trusted sword. By capturing Kyoto and eliminating Nobunaga, Akechi Mitsuhide, for a brief, dizzying moment, became the master of central Japan. He immediately began to act, trying to consolidate his success. He secured the support of the imperial court, which may well have been a secret accomplice in the plot. He sent letters to other daimyo, calling on them to join him, and promising to restore the old order that the tyrant Nobunaga had trampled. He proclaimed himself the new shogun, trying to give his coup an air of legitimacy. It seemed his daring plan had succeeded. But he made two fatal miscalculations. First, he failed to win over the key players. Most daimyo adopted a wait-and-see attitude, not trusting the traitor and fearing the revenge of Nobunaga's heirs. Even his relatives and allies were in no hurry to support him. Second, and most importantly, he catastrophically underestimated the reaction speed and genius of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Mitsuhide was confident that Hideyoshi was bogged down in the West. He assumed he had weeks, if not months, to consolidate his power. But he didn't know that his messenger had been intercepted by Hideyoshi's men. Mitsuhide's triumph was built on sand. His reign, which he perhaps envisioned as the dawn of a new era, went down in history under the ironic name Mika Tenka, the 3-day reign, meaning short-lived. Although it actually lasted 13 days, this period proved laughably short compared to the eternity of shame he brought upon his name. The news of Mitsuhide's betrayal and Nobunaga's death reached Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who was besieging Takamatsu Castle with lightning speed. For any other general, this news would have been a catastrophe, heralding chaos and the collapse of the coalition. But for Hideyoshi, a genius of improvisation and political instinct, this was a unique opportunity. He instantly understood that whoever first avenged their master's death would become his rightful heir. While other Nobunaga generals, who were closer to the capital, delayed and dithered, Hideyoshi acted with superhuman energy. He concealed the news of Nobunaga's death from his enemy, the Mori clan, and using this disinformation, immediately concluded a peace treaty with them on favorable terms. As soon as the treaty was signed, Hideyoshi turned his 20,000-strong army around and began an unprecedented forced march back to Kyoto. This event went down in history as the Chugoku Return. In 6 days, his army covered nearly 200 kilometers, moving day and night. He had sent messengers ahead to organize the purchase of provisions and fodder in the villages along the route, paying generously and wasting no time on looting. He acted like an avenger, like an avalanche rushing from the mountains to punish the traitor. This march was not just a military maneuver. It was a masterpiece of logistics and propaganda that demonstrated to everyone who the true successor to Nobunaga's cause was. The monkey was flying on the wings of vengeance, and this speed sealed Akechi Mitsuhide's fate. Just 11 days after the coup at Honnō-ji, Hideyoshi's rapid march brought his army to the outskirts of Kyoto. Akechi Mitsuhide, caught off guard by such speed, was forced to hastily assemble his troops, which by that point numbered no more than 10,000 men and were demoralized by the lack of support from other daimyo. Hideyoshi's army, in contrast, had grown to 40,000. The decisive battle took place at Yamazaki. Hideyoshi, the more skilled tactician, managed to seize the key high ground, giving him a strategic advantage. The battle was short and fierce. Mitsuhide's troops, outnumbered and with low morale, broke and fled. Akechi Mitsuhide himself, suffering a total defeat, tried to escape. But fate had a dishonorable end in store for him. According to the most common version, as he was making his way through a bamboo grove, he was attacked by a group of peasant bandits. One of them, not knowing who was before him, struck Japan's traitor a mortal blow with a bamboo spear. Thus ended the path of the man who for 13 days had been the ruler of the country. The refined aristocrat, poet, and tea master, who had challenged the most powerful man of his age, died not in a glorious samurai battle, but in a muddy roadside ditch at the hands of a nameless commoner. Fate's irony proved more cruel than any sentence. Betrayal brought him nothing but eternal shame and a pathetic death. Oda Nobunaga's death did not plunge Japan back into the abyss of chaos, as one might have expected. On the contrary, it served as a catalyst that accelerated the final stage of unification. After eliminating Akechi Mitsuhide, Toyotomi Hideyoshi immediately claimed the status of chief heir to Nobunaga's cause. Backed by his army and the authority of the chief avenger, he subjugated the other generals, one by one. Over the next few years, he finished what Nobunaga had started. By 1590, all of Japan, for the first time in over a century, was under the rule of one man. Hideyoshi, the former peasant, became the country's absolute ruler. However, he failed to establish a stable dynasty. After his death in 1598, the country was again on the brink of civil war. And then, the third unifier took the stage, the patient old badger, Tokugawa Ieyasu. In the decisive Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, he crushed the coalition loyal to Hideyoshi's heirs and established his undisputed rule. He founded the Tokugawa shogunate, which brought Japan over 250 years of peace and stability. But both Hideyoshi and Ieyasu were, in essence, building their edifice on the foundation that Nobunaga had laid. It was he who had done the dirtiest and bloodiest work. He broke the back of the old feudal system, destroyed the most powerful clans, suppressed the separatism of the Buddhist monasteries, and proved that the very unification of the country was possible. His successors merely gathered the fruit from the tree he had planted and watered with blood. Even after 4.5 centuries, the ghost of Akechi Mitsuhide finds no rest in Japanese history, and the main question, why, continues to excite the minds of historians and writers. The absence of direct evidence, a death poem, or a manifesto from Mitsuhide himself has turned his act into a perfect canvas, on which each era has painted its own portrait of the traitor. For some, he is the classic usurper, driven by outsized ambition. He saw that Nobunaga had nearly finished the job and decided to strike at the last moment to claim the grand prize for himself. This version is simple, clear, and paints him in the darkest light. For others, he is an avenger, whose patience snapped after an endless series of public humiliations and personal tragedies, like the death of his mother. In this interpretation, his act is a tragedy of offended honor, understandable to any samurai. A third, more complex version presents him as a conservative idealist, a defender of tradition. He saw Nobunaga burning sacred temples, trampling the emperor's authority, and mocking the samurai code, and he genuinely believed he was killing a demon to save Japan's soul. He might have even been acting on a secret order from the imperial court, which transforms him from a traitor into a patriot. The truth, as is often the case, likely lies not in any one of these versions, but in their tragic intersection. It is probable that in his soul, at that fatal moment, all these motives converged. Burning personal grievance overlapped with cold political calculation, and fear for his own future mixed with genuine anxiety for the fate of the country. Akechi Mitsuhide will forever remain the most enigmatic and controversial figure in Japanese history, an eternal reminder that the greatest tragedies never have simple causes. And so we return to the central paradox. Why was the almost omnipotent demon unifier betrayed by his best, most enlightened general? The answer lies in the very nature of Nobunaga and his revolution. He was a genius of destruction. His strength lay in his ability to completely ignore the old rules of honor, religion, lineage. He promoted men for talent, not birth, as with Hideyoshi. He used new technology, like the arquebuses at Nagashino, to destroy old tactics. He burned temples without hesitation. This ruthless efficiency made him successful. but it also sowed the seeds of his own destruction. Akechi Mitsuhide was not just the best general. He was the best representative of the very world that Nobunaga was so furiously destroying. A world of culture, rituals, respect for tradition, a complex system of honor and duty. Nobunaga valued Mitsuhide's mind and competence, but he despised the very essence of his personality. Every time Nobunaga publicly humiliated Mitsuhide, he wasn't just insulting a man. He was spitting in the face of an entire world that this man embodied. Mitsuhide's betrayal was not an accident or a glitch in Nobunaga's system. It was its inevitable consequence. Nobunaga himself, with his own hands, created the perfect assassin. He gave him power, an army, brought him close, and then systematically destroyed everything that formed the basis of this man's identity, until all that remained was the scorched earth of resentment and hatred. He did not die because his best general betrayed him. He died because he forced his best general to become a traitor. His greatest strength, his ability to break men and traditions, turned out to be his fatal weakness. Even in his final act, in the agony of defeat and betrayal, Oda Nobunaga managed to retain control. By retreating into the depths of the burning Honnō-ji temple to commit seppuku, he pursued one final strategic goal. He knew that the head of a defeated enemy was the ultimate symbol of victory, the irrefutable proof of triumph that legitimizes the victor's power. By denying Akechi Mitsuhide this trophy, he dealt him a final posthumous blow. Nobunaga's body was never found. It dissolved in the fire, turning into ash and legend. This robbed Mitsuhide of the ability to display his omnipotence to the world, sowing doubt and uncertainty among potential allies. Nobunaga's death became the perfect end to his life, the final brushstroke in his portrait. He lived like a fiery whirlwind, burning everything in his path, and he left the same way, in a pillar of flame, leaving behind nothing but the scorched earth on which his followers could build a new world. He did not allow history to end with his humiliation. Instead, he transformed his defeat into the myth of the Phoenix, burning to be reborn as a new, unified Japan. His physical body vanished, but his will, his ambition of Tenka Fubu, outlived him and was brought to life by his heirs. Thus, even in death, he won a victory of sorts, turning an act of betrayal into the starting point for the final triumph of his cause. So, who did Oda Nobunaga ultimately remain in history? A brilliant builder or a demonic destroyer? The answer depends on your point of view. For the descendants of those he wiped out, the monks of Mount Hiei, the Takeda and Asakura clans, he will forever be a ruthless tyrant, a bloody despot who knew neither honor nor compassion. They remember him as the man who turned enemy skulls into wine cups and destroyed holy sites. In their history, he is absolute evil. However, for Japan as a unified nation, his role looks completely different. He was the ruthless surgeon who took on a hopelessly ill patient, one suffering from a century-long gangrene of civil war. His methods were terrible. He cut into living flesh, amputated entire social classes, and cauterized wounds with a red-hot iron. But he stopped the disease. He broke the feudal fragmentation that had condemned the country to eternal stagnation and suffering. He crushed the power of separatist religious institutions, creating the foundation for a secular state. He encouraged trade, built roads, abolished internal tariffs, and was open to contact with Europeans and their technologies. He didn't live to finish building the new Japan, but he cleared the construction site for it, demolishing the rotten ruins of the old world to their very foundations. He was not so much a builder as a brilliant demolition architect. His legacy is a paradox. Modern unified Japan grew largely from the ashes of the fires he ignited. The story of Oda Nobunaga is not just a tale of feudal wars in a distant land. It is an eternal, universal parable about the nature of power and the price of revolution. It asks a fundamental question: can a new, better world be built without becoming a monster? Nobunaga was the embodiment of the idea that the ends justify the means. His goal was the unification of the country and an end to a century of slaughter, a goal that was, without doubt, a good one. But the means he chose, total terror, blasphemy, treachery, the ruthless elimination of all dissent, inevitably corrupted both him and his cause. His genius lay in his ability to be inhuman, to act like a force of nature, like a typhoon or an earthquake, sweeping everything from its path. He learned to ignore human feelings, both others and perhaps his own. He saw people only as pieces on a chessboard, to be moved and sacrificed for victory. But in this lay his Achilles' heel. He forgot that even the pawns on his board were living people, possessing pride, honor, love, and hatred. He became so engrossed in his great game that he failed to notice when one of the pieces, Akechi Mitsuhide, gained its own will and decided to flip the board. Nobunaga's lesson is that absolute power, built solely on fear and force, is fragile. It inevitably creates, within its own inner circle, the very poison of resentment and hatred that will one day destroy it. The flames at Honnō-ji Temple died out centuries ago, but the reflections of that fire still illuminate the dark corners of human history and psychology. The story of Oda Nobunaga is not a story of how he almost won. It is a profound study of why his defeat was predetermined by his own character. He was a man ahead of his time, a visionary who tried to drag his country into a new era by its hair. But he did so with such brutality that history itself rejected him, just one step from the finish line. His tragedy is the tragedy of any revolutionary who is so in love with his vision of the future that he is willing to destroy the entire present, including the people who inhabit it. He unified Japan not because of his cruelty, but in spite of it. His work was completed by other, more flexible and humane leaders who understood what he did not. That you must build not only with stone and steel, but also with trust, compromise, and respect. The image of the demon king, burning in a fire set by his best general, will forever remain a powerful symbol. It is a symbol that even the most brilliant plan to remake the world can be shattered by a simple yet eternal truth. The human soul, with its pride and its grievances, is a force that cannot be calculated, cannot be subordinated, and cannot be ignored with impunity.